Hi, welcome to Conscious Conversations, and today I'm going to be talking with Carla, and she's a therapist and she's got a very interesting story to tell, so let's get into it. Hello Carla.
Hello Trevor.
Thank you for doing this, and I'm just saying you've got an absolutely lovely place here as well. It's really it kind of tells a story by itself. So yeah, it's beautiful artwork, and yeah, some really interesting things. I could just spend all day just asking you questions about this.
Thank you.
So yeah, what's your story? What would you like to talk about?
It's so interesting, isn't it, about what's my story? I find some people are much more comfortable with talking, and I'm maybe not so, but there's a lot, and I was trying to capture it and put it into a sentence, and it was like from kind of dark to light. That's what I came up with, really.
Well, you work as a therapist now. Mm-hmm. What type of therapist?
So I'm a psychotherapist. There's different modalities that I've trained in, but I tend to work with trauma and the inner child and some of our exiled parts that aren't integrated.
So the question would be, how have you ended up doing this work?
Good question. So I guess when people say to me, how long have you been a therapist? I say unpaid, like it feels like my whole life. And I guess my own experience of life and things that I've been through, I feel like has been almost like training or an initiation to be able to understand and help people move through their difficulties at a really deep level where I feel like I fully understand.
So what would you say the key points have been in your own life that have been something that's really been a wake-up call or a challenge?
So I guess I was born in the 80s in Birmingham, which was a completely different time to now. I had a very young mum. There's kind of lots of violence and addiction in the family, Irish lineage, Gypsy lineage. And then we moved down to Bournemouth when I was young, and that felt like kind of unchaining for my family, I think. And there was lots of repeated patterns, lots of unresolved trauma to work through. I've worked through a lot of that myself, and then kind of coming into the lighter part of life was kind of finding recovery internally, externally, having children, finding energy and healing, and coming back to those parts of myself that were always active as a child but were shut down.
So yeah, anything you don't want to talk about, please feel free to just say that. But going back to childhood, because that's where, the most formative years, and that's kind of where our journey gets sort of influenced the most. What was your childhood like?
My childhood was chaotic, dysfunctional, scary. But it's very interesting because that, forms a lens of, how I looked at life. I had a lot of repeated patterns. And then when I have cleared the unresolved issues, it's interesting how that lens changes. It becomes clear. And then I can see the love that was always there, but was covered up with people around me being in survival mode and being fearful, and were only able to do what they could do at the time. But that's a long process.
Yeah, and I think I can relate to that, because my dad was actually he drank a lot, very disconnected from me. And my mother was very loving and caring, and it was the polarity between the two was, and as we know, you subjugate your own authenticity for attachment, so you stop expressing yourself as a child in order to get attachment, and that's a pattern that continues, and until you actually recognize the fact that actually I'm not being authentic. Because as a child, when you try to be authentic, sometimes with parents they shut you down. You can't cry, you can't express yourself, and you want to keep that connection, so you end up molding your behavior to fit into their view of the world and their perspective. So yeah, I think only through that experience and then the gradual unraveling. I think a lot of people think healing is all, oh, it's just rainbows and butterflies. It's a deconstruction of yourself. So it's painful, and it doesn't happen in one go. Sometimes you think, oh, I'm doing really well, and all of a sudden, oh, I'm going back 2 steps. I'm doing really well. I'm going back 2 steps. So what would you have liked to have happened differently as a child?
I was just thinking, it's interesting what you said just then, Trevor, about the stepping back and coming forward, stepping back. Because I always say with clients, I don't see it that way. I see that we spiral down and we spiral up. You know, a lot of people want like an equilibrium. They want to go through life like this because it's safe and it feels contained and controlled. And, you know, life is a heartbeat. So it's like when we spiral down, it's like we're just finding deeper truths. There's like more space within ourselves where we can go deeper and find more truths, and then come back up with that and kind of get the, you know, the head above water again, and then things can feel good, and then we spiral back down for like the next kind of process, I guess. And yeah, when you were talking, I was thinking about attachment, as you said, and you know, for some people, the caregivers, they're not safe, and it's like attachment then gets really disrupted, and it's safer to be away. And for me, I went very inside myself, and I felt like I was in a glass box, but I didn't realize I felt like I was in a glass box. You know, so I could connect with other people. You know, I knew everything about everybody else, very nosy, very other people orientated, and very curious about people's stories, but people kind of couldn't get into me. And it was only after, you know, quite a long time kind of recovering and having my children that this glass box started to kind of come away, and I started to have feelings and sensations in my body that I hadn't had, and you know, memories returning that I hadn't resolved. And as you said, that unraveling, I remember a point in time where I was doing some written work, and there was these questions I was trying to answer, and I couldn't quite understand them, and I was checking them with other people, and I had a completely different way of looking at the questions that other people did. And you know, like in a film where the camera kind of like pans out and then everything kind of just seems a bit weird, like I literally had that happen. And I was in a field, and I was going, I don't know what's going on. I was trying to answer these questions, and then it's like my whole life just kind of panned out. I felt very destabilized, and you know, I've been dissociated for a long time and insomniac for a long time, and all of a sudden it was like I felt the first time that I was connected to something in here, and that glass box wasn't there anymore, and I felt so exposed. Yeah, so I was just thinking about that.
And I think when you don't have the resources, the internal resources, or a safer environment, and things do come up or things are triggered, that can be very traumatizing in itself. But also I feel that lots of times people find themselves in a safe environment where there is space, and then things just come up when you'd least want them to come up because you're in a safe space. So when all that happened, was there a level of fear that came up with it?
Definitely. I didn't know what was going on. I felt like I was kind of cracking up. I didn't have it in me to go up to a person and, you know, go, oh, this is going on for me. So again, very internal, just, you know, had myself really. And just thinking about your other question of what would I have liked to be different in childhood, again, where I'm at now in my life, I look back and I wouldn't really change anything. You know, I don't have regrets, and you know, my belief system is that we are the universe experiencing itself, and I feel really fortunate for the journey that I've taken myself on to, you know, get to where I am. And I wouldn't be and understand everything that I do now had I not gone through the things that I'd gone through. But I guess if I go back to childhood and think about what I wanted to be different, I suppose it would be some kind of grounding. My my thing was being very connected to, you know, what's going on out there. I don't think my feet were on the ground, didn't feel safe enough. You know, my brother was born, and that was certainly an anchor for me, because there was someone else, you know, in the dynamic. But, you know, I was very connected to energy, things I could see, things I could feel, things that would visit. And I think those kind of things got me through. And then it kind of went dark for a while, and then as I've cleared stuff and got lighter, you know, those things have come back, but without the programming and the blueprint of the unclear lens of when I was a child.
Yeah, and it's I think when you open up spiritually and energetically, for those that haven't done that, that's a new level, a new perspective that you have to kind of adopt and adapt to. And also, you know, a lot of people think, oh, well, the spiritual work, the energy work is the answer. It's an aspect of it. The psychological work is just important. The physical, the you know, how the body stores the information is another aspect to it. And I see lots of people that go down the spiritual route, and they're still doing, the mind is still not healed, the body's still not healed, and they wonder why they're not getting the results that they want. So it's a complete holistic experience. So did you find that, I mean, there's also, I call them like superpowers that you get from being in an environment that people would say is negative, like being hypervigilant, being able to read people, being able to sense the energy of a room, because you've had to be like that to survive sometimes in stressful situations. What positive things would you say that have come from that experience?
Yeah, exactly that. Superpowers is the word, definitely. Yeah, I think, yeah, being very sensitive, being able to read a room in like a nanosecond, you know, being able to check for safety. And for me, it feels very primal, you know, when like the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and, you know, that's really primal from when we didn't have all this distraction and in this technology world, and, you know, when we lived in communities, and that's what we had. We had our senses. There's so many more senses, you know, that we're not taught and unaware of. So, yeah, for me, being able to read a room, being able to read people, being able to see if there's truth there or not. And for me, I think I definitely have clairsentient and claircognizance. So it's like I sometimes just know things about people. I can hear their stories being in their energy, which is great for the work that I do. And yeah, and then I guess it's, you have a choice then whether to step into someone's energy field or not.
I tend to think everything's information. Yeah. So however we receive that information or interpret that information, and our beliefs and our perspectives shape how we perceive that and what we do with that information. So when you're working with a client, you know, I think it is important to make sure that you've healed as much of yourself as you possibly can, because then you're not getting, you're not avoiding some of the information that you might get that may trigger you. And you're not saying, oh, well, I'll listen to this information, but I'll subconsciously ignore this information. So you usually find that the really good people, the really good therapists and healers have been through the fire. They're not in the fire, they've been through it and come out the other side. The ones that are still in it, that's not a great place to be when you're doing work for the client or for the practitioner as well. So when you, from your childhood, how did that initial lack of safety manifest in your behaviours as your teenage years and things that evolved from that?
Yeah, teenage years were tough because I guess I kind of repeated, internalized, manifested, whatever word you want to use, kind of how I interpreted how I was being treated, which would have been normal for me, then is how I became my internal monologue and how I treated myself. So my teenage years were really destructive, you know, lots of addictions, eating disorders, self-harming, whilst maintaining that I was okay. You know, there was a lot of isms, so, you know, I often had 2 or 3 jobs. You know, I was very high functioning. I didn't sleep. It wasn't safe enough for me to feel like I could sleep. I didn't have an off button, undiagnosed ADHD, manic episodes, but could still go to school, go to college, go to uni, do my work. You know, I was just, you know, a Duracell bunny. There was kind of like no off button. So yeah, I guess it came out in the destruction of my, you know, how I felt about myself in those times. Yeah.
So yeah, that lack of self-worth, lack of self-love, it's so common. It's so common in, you know, it's almost an epidemic within society now. And there's so many different perspectives of what is causing that, but ultimately it's about you taking responsibility and facing your fears and going inside. I always say it's an inside job, and it is. But when you're in a place of perhaps recovering from addiction, perhaps recovering from abuse, you're not thinking straight. Your perspective of the world. When you're in fear, you can't relax. When you've got a lot of uncertainty, you can't relax. So being able to grasp onto something that can be useful, you know, even if it's just a friend or a book or a belief system. Many people go into religion, or, you know, there's positive ways of pulling yourself out of that, and people go into destructive things, all of which are serving a need. There's a lot of people in this particular area that are in recovery, and, you know, many people can see people that are on a park bench or in a park drinking alcohol and look down on them. But, you know, as Gabor Mate says, that one of my favourite therapists is, you know, everybody's self-soothing. You know, the people that are in pain, and, you know, it's I know there should be more support, but I think what's happening is there is a spiritual awakening now, and that spiritual awakening is bringing with it a lot of people that have been through this to go, you know, I've been there. And you can get through this. And if nothing else, I think the social media and the internet is something that people can access where they wouldn't normally have that information. So it's in one way, it's helping people to feel less isolated and have communities that come together. So when you were going through this destructive phase, how did you break that? How did you come out of that in one piece?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I feel like I was given a child, and I feel like, you know, I remember this, it's like time to do something different. And you know, when I work with clients in their kind of trauma loops, it's like I just see that everything we do gets repeated, and we're just looking for completion. That's all we're doing. And, you know, people learn from pain and suffering. And then for me, my personal experience, you know, I was learning from pain and suffering. Like you said, there's always a reason of why we're doing something. And then over time, you know, when I really deep dived into my stuff, you know, I'm coming to the point of being able to learn through love, and learn through trust, and learn through belief, and learn through bliss and joy. And this is something that I never thought was a thing. I thought it was always trudging through the stuff. And yeah, and I guess I also have a belief of kind of every 7 years we move up the chakra into a different kind of phase, and I work this way with clients as well. And as you said, very holistically, so physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. You know, for a car to move, the 4 tires need to be all working. And yeah, so for me, I was just repeating patterns, and then, yeah, you know, falling pregnant, which was intended. I've got 2 beautiful children, you know, both very intended. And I guess it wasn't about me anymore. It was about, you know, someone else, and not wanting to repeat patterns, wanting to be a conscious parent and a conscious person, and, you know, no longer kind of I could actualize something. I could put my action and purpose into something, whereas before, the world was just kind of happening. And I suppose as I, recovered and had a much cleaner life inside and out, my lens became clear, and then I could realize, that we co-create, and we have our life how we want it to be. It was about being empowered and realizing that we have choices. People get very stuck in their minds, going round and round, thinking that they can't do anything. It's a helpless state. And what you were saying about Gabor Mate and trauma, it's like, we're not taught this stuff. Thank God for the internet in that way. We're not taught about the self. We're in the West, the Eastern philosophy is very different, but it's not that long ago we were in war, and that trauma has come down the line, and it's like some of the things that we have to deal with, it's not even our stuff, and people are just lost in all this stuff going on, and it's like, this is the work of the ancestors and the lineage and the DNA, and and when we can kind of, I speak for myself, when I learnt to kind of get in the flow of that, and life becomes a dance, and life becomes a game, and life becomes purposeful, meaningful, empowered. How am I going to respond to something today? How am I going to move past that energy? How am I going to step into this? And that's about, for me, having a bit more space inside. As you said, when a person is fearful, they're in survival mode, they're in their root chakra, that's all where the stuff is. And when we kind of move up into a different space and get clearer, it's like, okay, I have a choice here, and I can respond, not react. And energy just feels completely different. Again, the dark and the light. Would I really know what a miracle it is to be here right now had I not been in a very dark hole for a long time? It's the yin yang, isn't it?
So one of the things that I noticed you said there was about the way you bring your children up, and the way that you treat them differently to how you were treated, or the things that you experienced. So it's like a polarity response. And I noticed sometimes in a family, one sibling can become like the mother or the father, and another one can go, actually, I'm going a completely different way. So, even when, for people that are listening to this or watching this, people, even though you're having a bad experience, as your perspective changes through your experiences in life, you can also look back on them experiences and think, I'm so glad that they taught me that. And that in itself is a healing. So is that something that is something that you've experienced?
Yeah, definitely. And interestingly, it tends to be the people that I work with also. So yeah, for me, if I think about, when I had my daughter, there was still, unconscious parenting, from the beginning, and I could kind of see how my natural nurturing had been disrupted from how, I believe I was treated. And then, by the time my son came around, which was 3 years later, I remember feeling like life was amazing. I was fortunate enough to just have time with my kids when I was young. I wasn't too busy. I had a beautiful flat. I felt, the best I'd ever felt then, which compared to now, it's like, even I don't have the words for, but I do remember, putting the children to bed and, being with them and reading stories, and I remember, even though I had, because you talk about polarities, even though I had all this, my heart was so open and I was really happy with how my life was, there was a part of me that didn't want to be here. And I remember feeling that, I was putting my children to bed, and this part was like, I just, what's the point of existing? Really existential thinking. And I was like, what is going on? How can I have these two really opposing feelings? And then I really dug deep and went through my life, and I guess that was really the beginning of a mass unraveling. And with clients, I talk about that swinging pendulum, because I call them the lineage breakers. Those are the clients that sit on the couch, the ones that were scapegoated, the ones that disrupt the family system. Family systems, they all stick together and don't rock the boat and don't rock the apple cart and all of those things. And as the trauma gets passed down, this is my view, at some point it gets really heavy on the shoulders of someone. And, and they're the lineage breakers. They're the ones that are like, this isn't okay, and I can see that things aren't okay, and I don't feel okay. And rather than pretending, they go on this emotional healing journey. And those are the clients that I tend to work with. And we talk about that swinging pendulum because, I don't think it's necessarily healthy to do the complete opposite to how you were brought up, because there's always gold along the way, and we can't just deny where we've come from and say it was all wrong and that it should be different. And because if we do the complete opposite, all we're doing then, the next generation, is doing that for those children, and then they're swinging back. It becomes unbalanced. So I always talk about the swinging pendulum kind of slowing down and finding that balance, because people tend to look for certainty in life. So everything's either all good, all bad, black, white, light, dark. And it's like, well, what's the balance? How can we take everything and alchemize it into something else?
And that fits in with research in neurochemistry as well. One of the researchers, I forget her name now, but she was saying that they measured the fact that when you have a high, you don't just go down to your normal self, you have to go the equivalent low. So it's like this, a big sine wave. Your chemistry actually dips before it comes back up again. So it's a bit like dropping a boulder into a river, or like a coconut into a river. It drops and then it has to float back up again. So that's the kind of thing. And I relate to the fact that, like, you don't have to be suicidal or want to live, but I've been in places where I go, I'm not suicidal, but I don't really want to live anyway. I don't even want to. I think what helps people live is when they've got a purpose, when they feel connected. So it's not that all of you doesn't want to live. It's like there's an aspect of you that's going, why am I here? Why have I been invited to this party? I'm not doing anything. It's a member of the group on stage just sat there watching everybody play, and you're like, what's the purpose? So it's an interesting thing. And Viktor Frankl wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning. It was in the concentration camps, and it is that meaning that we give to things, even things that have passed. And do you find that when you look back on certain things now with this new perspective and this new level of growth and more love that's in your system, you can not only forgive but also kind of extrapolate the positive or the meaning from that, or the lesson from that? Is that something that you've experienced yourself?
Like absolutely, like over and over again. And yeah, I call it time bending, and I do this in my work, where there is no time and space. Like everything's just happening now, all the time. And then so whatever's happening now, we get to choose. And it's like, the work, some of the work that I do is like we can go back to those points in time, when there's this part. I'd like to see everything as parts. So again, it's not all or nothing. It's loads of different parts with all different roles, doing different things, trying to complete certain things. And we can go back to this part 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old who's sat, lost, desperate, scared, full of shame, whatever. And we can go back and sit beside that part and tell that part about how its life has turned out so far. Yeah, give it some faith that like things are okay, things get better. And to pass that information on, like I get goose pimples when I talk about it, when you pass that information on, you're passing it to yourself at every given moment. And then what I like to do when you've comforted that part is to sit and then call in your elder who hasn't actualized yet. And then that part comes in, and if I sit and listen deeply enough, I can hear my wise old woman telling me what the rest of my life looks like and to keep going. So it's like sandwiching this kind of time bending, void vortex, and it's like, and then for me, I can look back and things feel clearer, and then looking forward, it's like I've left this trail for me to follow, because whenever I look back I can see the trail that I've left myself to be here, and that trail continues.
Yeah, interesting. It's quite synchronistic, because sometimes when you're doing this work, a fear will come up, and last couple of weeks a fear came up, and it's like, oh, it's not something I'm scared of in the moment, it's not something I'm feeling, but it's a fear. And I'm like, okay, you know what, I'm going to sit with it. And this is something that's a lot of people start doing now. Instead of avoiding it or trying to take a substance or distract from it, okay, and it's hard sometimes unless you're used to it, sit with it and talk to the fear. So the fear's there just to go, hey, listen, I'm just letting you know that there's something that you need to pay attention to. And I'd go back, I'm like, what's the fear? And I'd drill down. And it's usually a fear of not feeling safe, not feeling loved, not feeling connected. And as I'm sat there, I went, when did I, and it really relaxed. And this is something that people can do. It's like, when did I feel this? And I remember when I was like maybe 13 or 12 or 13, and my dad would just slap me, And in fact, I was probably younger than that. And I thought, oh, just let me get that. And then I imagined myself as who I am now, because, you become the person that you would protect the younger you. And I'd all visual, all in the imagination. And I'd stand, just before it happened, I'd stand in between my father and me, the younger version of me, and going, this is not happening. I've got this. And I'd set up a boundary there, and then I'd turn to the child, the younger version, and comfort that person. And say, it's okay, I've got you, you're safe, you're loved, it's all right. And then I'd sit and go, right, what's the next one? And I'd just go through like a timeline. Okay. And then the fear just dissipated. I'm like, okay. So there's all these different techniques. And before we get onto the esoteric spiritual things, there is, I think initially you start with this process of, oh, this is me, this is just who I am, and you start becoming more aware of who you are, and the fact that, if you look at a child who's on the floor and they're playing with toys, that's their world. They're not thinking of what's happening in Uganda, America, Australia. And as you become older and more experienced, and your awareness expands, that's more information coming into your system that you have to deal with. And so as we do this, it's like, okay, well, who am I? And it's very much a mental thing and a physical thing. And then as we expand, it becomes a spiritual thing. And there's a whole new world of things to experience. So you've given me some lovely ceremonial cacao today, which is classed as plant medicine. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed looking around here, there's so many references to plant medicine. So the spiritual side, even though for some people have not experienced that, has been a really important part of your healing journey.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you were talking about then, about that, really getting in the way of your father and your younger self, is like that re-parenting process. As I think how we view the world when we're young, like you said, it's the rupture's never the problem, it's the repair. And so many people didn't have repair. And so that what you're talking about there, I kind of call the reparenting process, where it's, all these parts that didn't have that guidance and that help and that love and that nurture, we start to do that for ourselves, and then we start to get resilient, and then again we change our view on what the world is like. It's no longer hostile. It can be nurturing. And I suppose for me, I feel like plant medicine was something that was just always going to be in my life. I feel like I've known it for millennia, old versions of me at different times and spaces. And I remember someone talking to me about ayahuasca many years ago, 18 years ago something, when it wasn't so well known now. And then he just said the word, and it was like he said, "Oh, have you ever sat with ayahuasca?" I said no, and he just went, "Oh, Carla." And you know the way someone says something sometimes and it hits you? It was like this dart that just went, and it just really hit me, and I was like, oh. And I'm someone who I've learnt to be, patient, and, I when I was young, just wanted everything now, and, time was just kind of not a thing, and, but with plant medicine, it was a real slow process. So I didn't have this part that wanted to race and wanted to kind of grab it and fill myself up. It was like something that I knew was just going to unfold and unravel, a bit like my children and my recovery and, reparenting process. And I suppose I've been in the plant medicine world for the last 7 years, very deeply, lots of different medicines, lots of different countries, and also lots of different training, that I work with myself, with medicines, with other people, one-to-ones, groups, and, part of different teams. And I think this is, where we originate from. Every country has its own medicine, and we were connected to the earth. We forget, we haven't been taught, we haven't been reminded that we're nature. We look to go into nature, forgetting that we are nature. And I feel like over time our connection has been cut off, and I see the world now as, all these kind of old ways, original ways, are coming back, and people are becoming more connected, and that search for meaning. And like you said, when people haven't got the tools, people are lost, but now, the tools are coming out everywhere, and it's working. I see it in my work where, I work with particular age people, maybe some older people. It takes a little bit longer to kind of recognize and work through stuff. And then, the younger generations now are just much more switched on. They want to be more healthy. They want to be more conscious. They're making, all these empowered decisions. Not like I was doing in my 20s, and I have all these people in their 20s that are, consciously walking the planet and are so much more aware. And I suppose my plant medicine journey has just, it's blown me apart and put me back together again, really, yeah.
Yeah, it's a cumulative effect of consciousness expanding in communities, in countries, and there is this energetic thing that's happening now. And for anybody that doesn't know about plant medicines, there's lots of different types. There's ayahuasca. Let's do a check. What have we done? Ayahuasca. Okay. Ibogaine.
Iboga. That's next on my list.
I'm not doing iboga. Iboga is like a 15-hour brutal.
Yeah.
But do you know what's interesting is that you say, I'm never doing that, right? And then all of a sudden it presents, you don't decide, it comes to you. And with ayahuasca, some people will never do it, and other people will just go, oh, it was mentioned a few weeks ago, next minute I'm there in a cup, and there's a shaman singing in a room, and I'm vomiting into a bucket. So it comes into your field. So ayahuasca, iboga, San Pedro.
Yes, Wachuma.
Oh.
It's a little baby Wachuma here. Yeah.
San Pedro. What else have we got?
So peyote, which is the cousin of Wachuma, a different cactus. Cambo.
Yeah, Cambo. Done Cambo. Cambo is the legal one, isn't it? We can do Cambo.
We're allowed to do Cambo. Yeah.
Bufo, the 5-MeO.
Bufo, yeah. So you got the frog and the toad. Yeah. Then we've got tobacco.
Yeah.
So tobacco is there's different ways with tobacco. So that's the original medicine, and there's so many stories that you get told about how the medicines came. And you can drink tobacco, you can use hape, which is a snuff that gets blown up your nose, or you can smoke as mapachio. Yeah, so tobacco is kind of like multi-use, and it's a foundation with all the other medicines as well. Well,
mapachio, they initially, when I was in the ceremony, they would blow on me, like, oh, get that horrible smell away from me. Anyway, I did a dieta with it where I was drinking it for a couple of weeks, and then I love it. I'm like, okay, this is, this is amazing. And for anybody who's not experienced plant medicines, they are it still is the most incredible night of my life when I first experienced it. But it's not for everyone. And there's also, I would definitely say that it's incredible diagnostic and healing range of tools, but the space has got to be held safely, and finding good practitioners who are responsible and ethical and talented at what they do is really important. So don't just jump into anything like this. There's so many people out there that have just jumped on the bandwagon and gone, oh, I can do that. And a lot of them have gone from, especially a lot of the men that are holding the conscious groups, they used to do drug dealing, and now they've just switched from that to this, and they're using the same energy and the same alpha male energy to almost hold that space, and you can feel it. So being very mindful of who you work with, and even in other countries like Peru, some of those areas, and Mexico, it can be very dark. And so, who was how did you have your experience? Your first experience, what was that like?
So I was just thinking then when you were talking about safety and setting and a trusted recommendation from someone, and for people that have worked with shamans, pages, taters and tribes, rather than the kind of white man that goes to Iquitos and meets Shipibo and then comes back and thinks they're a shaman and then wants to present medicine. And I was thinking, of course, our native medicine is mushrooms. So that's our English medicine. So my first experience, so again, going back to that patience, because I, throughout the years found myself looking it up and, shall I go and but I knew when I'd get the call, and I have I feel a very strong relationship with the universe where, I put things out there all the time and say, if it's meant to happen, you'll let me know. I bargain, I make contracts with the universe all the time. Well, let me know when this is supposed to happen and make this very clear. And for me, that flow of living in life is just all the time. Everything's a mirror. Every single nanosecond is showing me something. It's whether I can see it and hear it deeply enough, if I'm quiet enough to be able to receive it. But I remember I was, so I kept leaving it alone, and then I went camping with a bunch of friends. There was someone there I didn't really know very well, and I was like, so what's your story? Because I'm a curious therapist and I love people's lives, and we were chatting away, and then she just said the word ayahuasca, and I was like, ears, what? And she said, there's one coming up actually in a couple of months. I think there's a couple of spaces, and it was like, it's like that's the moment, because I said, make sure it just lands in my lap, and it literally landed in my lap, and I was like, off I went. And I didn't realize there was other medicines I was sitting with then, so San Pedro and tobacco and ayahuasca, and that was my first experience. And there are contraindications, like you said. It's really important that you have safety checks, and for me I was okay, and the medicine will always show you and speak and communicate with you how you understand it. So for some people there's loads of visions, for some people they have a direct conversation with the plant spirits, for other people it's all about feelings, and I felt like I had the lot. And I feel like the medicines don't ever bring you what you can't handle. If you've had the call and this is what you're here to heal and clear and actualize, and yes, it might be a very difficult time, but the next day see how you feel. See what you've cleared, see how much lighter life is and how much clearer the lens is. And for me, my first experience was very much lineage work. I had DNA strands coming out of me. I could see all my family, and I could see, and I grieved and I grieved and I grieved and I grieved, what they all couldn't let go of, everything that was stuck inside them. And, and it was so beautiful. I hadn't been able to cry for a really long time. So to have that release, was just unbelievable. And then, that definitely started my very long journey of being on this path. And then, things open up, and it has informed my practice. It's deepened my relationship with me, my relationship with the universe, my relationship with remembering nature, you know, my children, it's, you know, the work that I do. It's it's like being, for me, it was like being kind of colorblind, or, you know, blind, and then you put some glasses on and then you can see, you know, in multi-color.
It's incredible. It's incredible. I did 33 ceremonies in the first 15 months. So it came from something that was not even on my radar to something that was a really important part of my awakening and progression. And it's almost like being taken on a yacht in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it's throwing you around. Okay, now learn to sail. And that was kind of how my healing work got activated. And yes, once the medicine connects to you, it's there. And one of the things that I see with people, though, they and I have a joke about this. It's like they connect to ayahuasca, and suddenly all the focus is on that. All the focus is on plant medicines, and you know, they got obsessed with it. And I say, you know, don't get obsessed with the postman. Get obsessed. You know, don't focus on the postman. Focus on the mail that you've just been delivered. It's the message. And after about 33 ceremonies, the ayahuasca went, okay, you're done now. For now, you're done. And I went, okay, thank God for that. Because each time I'm going, never doing it again, never doing it again. And then the next morning you're there going, are we getting ready for the next one? Yeah, okay. So one of the analogies that I use is that when plant medicine is like a postman, it delivers a message. And people often get obsessed with a postman and don't actually read the mail. So I know people that have done quite a number of ayahuasca ceremonies or whatever plant medicine ceremonies, and they're still in the same place. They've not actually done any inner work or integration. So what's your perspective on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely agree, and I've seen that as well. And integration's definitely the word there. There's a saying that the ceremony starts when the ceremony finishes. And yeah, it's not a magic pill. It's not a shortcut. Often people can think that. And yes, it's it's about, for me, taking the messages and the the findings and the gifts and whatever I've been given during ceremony, it's taking them home with me, and how do I integrate that into my life, into my family's life, into my work life, how into just my life, what am I meant to do with what I've been given. And I do find that if you're not integrating that work, the plant medicine journey can be tough, because you get stuck in loops. And the spirit's there, the plant medicine, it's intelligence, it's pure intelligence, and it will come and kick you in the ass. If you're not doing the work, or give you the same lessons over and over, and people get stuck. It's about being able, for me, to come home and continue the process. Keep eating well, keep sleeping well, keep having self-care high. Journaling, using all the other tools that there are out there to integrate this work, because it's a real unraveling journey that's very intense with the plant medicines, and you need that time to come back and be able to let that land and let that settle and figure out what it means for you, and then how are you going to implement those changes to make your life better.
Yeah, I think the point there about tools, the more tools you've got, and I've been lucky enough to work with lots of different types of people and lots of different disciplines, and they all have, what they have in common is the fact that they're all changing information. They're all changing the way people's perceive information, people interpret the information of things. So you could have NLP, you could have hypnotherapy, you could have EFT, you could have plant medicines, you could have whatever it is that you do, and it's what tools are really useful for you, and you won't know until you try it. Some people can do one plant medicine ceremony and they've changed everything. Some people can sit with a therapist for an hour and that's it, because all healing is a personal internal experience, and journaling is something I think is really useful, but some people might not think it's useful. And so I would say to anyone that's struggling or in a place where they feel like they are stuck, is to be open. Just be open to the fact that you know, try not to be judgmental about whatever, even if it's something like ecstatic dance, that might be something that you need and don't realize that you need that. So, and as a therapist, the more tools you've got, you may think, actually, this is not working. I'm going to take one of these and try this tool. I'm going to try this tool. And so the more experience you can have, the more approaches you can use. And it's never one size fits all. And it's I think it's important that healers keep on healing, and also be aware that they need to heal. When somebody goes, oh yeah, I've done all that, I'm fine now. The universe goes, really? Let's show you this. And for anyone going through what we call the dark night of the soul, you'll notice that when the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, wants you to shift, everything happens at once. It's not just one thing, everything happens at once. And the victim within a person, their perspective of being a victim can also suddenly go, oh, well, the universe hates me. You know, why me? See, I deserve this. Their low self-worth gets validated again. But the universe has a plan, and it's like we're stripping away all this thing from you. So is that something that happened to you? Was it not just one event? Was it a number of events altogether?
Oh, definitely. It feels like a lifetime's work, you know, and you know, and this is the work that I do with clients. You know, there's a saying that I love: if nothing changes, nothing changes. So it's like you can keep doing the same thing and learn from suffering and be stuck here, or you can decide to do something different and just see what happens. You know, I think all we are really is energy and vibration and frequency. And so if you're just stuck here going, why me? You know, why not? Really, you know, and all these triggers, and you know, society has taught us over the years, you know, if that hurts, don't do it again. If that person's annoy you, don't go near them. And, you know, actually I got myself to a point of, you know, inviting the triggers. You know, that's where the work is, that's where the resilience is, that's where, because it's just teaching me. And rather than being that, oh, this trigger and this is painful and I have all these big feelings, it's like, you know, I step into the energy of, okay, what's the learning here, and how come I'm doing this to myself through the eyes of someone else, you know, the mirror. It's always bring it back to me, and what am I being shown, what's my lesson, what am I doing or not doing that needs to change. And I feel like when we become, back to that reparenting, much more gentle with ourselves, we're more gentle with other people, and then the kind of things slow down and we're not in that survival mode anymore. And you know, the feelings that have been trapped, you know, as they come up, you know, strap in. It's you know, it's certainly a journey, but like once some of that clears and we feel lighter and we get more space, you know, then that resilience builds, and then we're able to see them coming, to see the triggers coming. You know, we go from hindsight to midsight to foresight, you know, and then we can invite the triggers and move through them quicker and easier. Spiral down.
I think the challenge is you don't know what you don't know. And when you're stuck, you're like, I've done everything I can possibly do. Or you believe that you have. So just do something completely different. But usually what stops you from doing something completely different is the fear. Because then what happens if I don't do this? And most people live uncomfortably comfortable. You know, they go to work, they do the 9 to 5, you know, they'll watch football, they'll have a few drinks at the weekend, they'll buy new furniture from IKEA, you know, and you're like, it's like what the song from Trainspotting, you know, choose life. And it's very much like that. And what usually happens is that when we have these awakenings, when we move into the spiritual aspect of ourselves, is because we're kind of pushed into it through the dark night of the soul, through trauma. And everybody's on the journey, whether they like it or not. We've all got to do it. We've all got to do it. And I think just having that perspective, I think the gift of having spiritual experiences such as plant medicine or meditation or whatever it is that you know that you are not just your body. You know that you are, like Eckhart Tolle said, when he had his awakening, he kind of said to himself one day, I just, you know, I think it was something like, I can't stand being with myself anymore. Well, who's the I? And so having that that other perspective of going, actually, not just an idea, but an actual knowledge of actually, I exist separate. So when people have near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences, it's such a change in their life because they know, it's not a belief, they know they exist separate from the body. Yeah. And therefore that perspective that we live after we die, and that life is something that is happening for us and not to us. And that when we point our finger at someone else, there's three fingers pointing back. That old saying is that, I mean, I've got to a stage now where if I'm not happy with things in my life, I go, I've created this. Yeah. I don't know how I've created it exactly, but I've created it. So now what am I going to create? And that's without the fear. Because the fear is what puts the brakes on. You can't move forward.
And often shame. Yeah, people are crippled with fear and shame, and hold on to familiarity because that feels safe. You know, it's a false safety. And you know, we can start that separateness really simply by coming into the observer seat. You know, because everything is just a story. You know, millions and millions and millions of stories. The brain is so powerful. And we can feed it different things, which then feeds our nervous system, you know. So whatever we're putting in here, if we're in here a lot, which we are in the West, it needs to be a good place to be. Otherwise, we're feeding our nervous system and it becomes this feedback loop. You know, and I work with clients about when they're, you know, they're stuck in their mind and everything's awful and how are we going to get out of this, and we're catastrophizing and I'm no good, and, you know, all of this stuff is like just in that moment when you realize, when you have the awareness, just to push that screen back and it becomes a cinema screen and there's the story there, and as you've done that, then you are in the seat watching the story, and it just gives a little bit of space. Yeah. And then you're in the observer seat, and then it's like, I'm not the story, I'm observing the story. Now I have choice, now I have awareness, now I can do something different, now I can project a different story, or I can turn it off, or I can go to a different cinema screen. And you know, these kind of mindful techniques, they've been laughed at over time, because it's like, how can something like that change this trauma? But again, as you said, be open, try it, because all it's doing is giving just that little bit of space from being stuck in that familiarity, which feels like a safe, controlled environment. And when we just get a little bit of space from it, then something else connects. And then we can see that, as you said, we are not just our minds, and we're not the stories that have been created, and we're not a trauma in our human experience. We're actually something else that's higher and inner and more connected and infinite than we ever could possibly have known.
I think that space that opens up, that kind of happened after I did my developmental work. And it could be, I say to this to clients, it could be a couple of seconds, but it's like somebody pulls in front of you, and normally you just get angry, and it's like, okay, I'm going to choose love or fear. I've still got a choice. I can choose to be angry, because if I can't choose to be angry, then that's not a healthy place to be either. Or I could choose love. I'm going, you know what? They might be having a bad day, and just that little bit of space to be able to go, let's just stop the game and just let's see what's happening, and then get back into it, is empowering.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've noticed that energetically when I'm working with people, because I can feel people's energies, is that they have some trauma or emotion that's in their system that they think they've processed, but it's still in their field. Yeah. And how it presents to me, it's in the energy field. And because I can feel it, once I've cleared that field, they're like, oh, I feel different, I feel lighter, because it's like one of the Russian Matryoshka dolls. It's like the energy's there and it's bouncing back. And so sometimes, you're not actually, you re-experience the energy that's in your field. Yeah. So when that's cleared, either through an energy healer or Kambo or other practice, you're freeing that space up as well. And then you're not re-suffering. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of different ways that people interpret that. But yeah, it's an interesting process, and it's continual. It's not like we're just going to heal and that's it. But what happens is that we get on the other side of the suffering. And when things happen that do challenge us, we can go, okay, I've got a set of tools now that I didn't used to have before. And even though this is unpleasant, I know it'll pass. And what's the learning in this? It's always a lesson. And so what's the biggest lesson that you've learnt? Oh, actually, I want to ask this question. How much do you actually love yourself now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel I'm quite a transformative person, and that's what my life has been. And I sometimes feel like Tasmanian devil, you know, where it's like, whoa, you said you have these big transformations and everything changes, you know, my work, my friendship groups, where I live, and it's like, and I always feel like the best version of me. You know, even when I'm going through the dark times, because I'm okay, I'm at that place of inviting the triggers, of going deeper down the well, of spiraling down and seeing what's going on and coming back up. So, you know, my love for me and my capacity for love is huge. My heart is open, and that, you know, shows in the dynamics of the relationships that I have with other people. Because if I love me and see me through this lens, I see the world completely differently. And then that feedback loop, you know, comes back. So it's just like a constant opening. And, you know, I do think it's a lifetime's work. You know, how deep can you go? It can get very existential. And I think back to what you were saying about being in the car and getting angry when someone cuts you up. And it's like, to have that level of awareness of what's going on there and internalize rather than externalize. So if someone's getting angry because someone's kind of come in, it's like, hold on a minute, you know, anger's a secondary emotion. It's not about that. What's coming up there in that moment with that anger? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and sometimes people, they just analyse the end result. It's like the cake's been baked and that's what they're tasting. It's like, okay, what's the ingredients? And if, for instance, if somebody pulls in front of you, you're angry, you're going, oh, you know, what is it that triggers you? And it's like, well, I'm angry at them, they shouldn't have done that. And then you rewind a little bit. Why? Well, they think they're better than me. Okay, and what's that triggering? Well, if they think they're better than me, then there's a belief in me thinking I'm not enough. Okay, if you're not enough, then what? Well, if I'm not enough, then I won't be loved. If I'm not loved, I'm not safe. And it's all that. So, yeah, it's being able to understand the mechanics of emotions. And I know I don't get it right every time. Sometimes the emotions driving the bus and the frontal cortex shuts down and I'm like, I'm triggered, but I don't last very long. I'm like, okay, let's get sober again, so to speak, you know, let's get back on there. But being able to sit like what you're doing, inviting triggers in, but knowing you've got the resources to deal with them. And I think you sometimes forget, when you've been doing this for so long, when you meet people, that they don't know what a chakra is. Yeah. They don't know what plant medicine is. They don't know what all these things are. And you think, wow. Yeah. You know, it's how life is different for you. Yeah. Yeah. And you see the evidence of that in their addictions, in their behavior, in their physicality. Because I'm a great believer, if things aren't dealt with, emotions, they form in the body as dis-ease. So it's I see this. I used to, when I read books about therapy first, I saw the symptoms that the books were describing in people around me, in my own family. And then I traced back to events that have happened or did happen in my family. I'm like, whoa. You see the ripples and you go, well, what stone made that? What started that? So something I briefly want to talk about is ancestral healing, because I've noticed that people do their own healing first. Maybe it's like being in A&E where you're saying, okay, well, let's just stabilize them in the moment. And then, okay, let's go back to the childhood. And then what? You know, and a lot of the ancestral stuff is coming up, because when you think that ancestrally we inherit the eye colour of our grandparents, or, you know, the facial features of our great-grandparents. So the idea that we inherit the DNA and the trauma that's associated with that. So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we forget we also inherit the gifts Yeah, and and we forget that. And there's so many things we can do to receive those gifts. Human beings, we got through ice ages. We're incredible. Yeah, we know how to survive, and I think now it's not about surviving or existing. It's about being. It's about expressing. It's about fully being here now. And for me, it's an honor and a blessing to be the one to be clearing this ancestral stuff. Somebody has to. And my life's much more interesting for doing that. I wouldn't choose anything else. And I think, I come from Irish lineage, and I've definitely felt more Irish as I've got older. And I've done loads of rituals where I light a candle and before I go to bed, and I write that I'm inviting my ancestral gifts to come through. Because as I clear the traumas, there's space now. And then I start to realize I can see and hear and feel energy more, or I have a singing voice come through, or I have some knowledge. I know how to do something, and I don't know where that's come from. And for me, my work's become much more energetic and intentional. I could have a locket. My last kind of energy work was a locket I had from my Irish nan from when I was 18, and I've held on for it, to it for a long time. And then I just felt I needed to get rid of that. And when I threw that into the ocean, the next few weeks just went massive changes in my life, because I'm letting go of that energy. And then I went to some other cacao ceremony, and we did a meditation and met kind of our alien parents, I think it was, and they gave me a new locket. And it's things like that when we do the rituals energetically and physically that we give back to nature of the internal work, things shift and things change. And I always try and think of like where I'm coming from internally. I think we have our adult self that's here most of the time, and then we have our internalized parents and how we talk to ourselves, our monologue, and then how we talk to others or think about others. And then we have our children, our free children and our traumatized children, and all the different roles there. And then how I'm responding to something, I'm like, where's that coming from? And in my internal family system, what do I need to do to make sure I find equilibrium and that I'm safe and I can respond from my adult? And the more ancestral work I do, the more my adult feels more like me and what I'm becoming. And that's not all about me being here, that's about me being connected to, I feel that I understand the lineage and the ancestry, and being the voice now for those that couldn't have the voice before. I've heard somewhere that in our DNA, we hold 7 generations before us. And when we do this healing work, we heal that, and we heal 7 generations ahead of us. Every generation has its difficulties and its traumas and its actualizations and realizations. And so every generation is different. And as much as we want everyone to wake up or come to their authenticity or their alignment of truth at the same time, that's just not going to happen. We're all here by right of our own consciousness at any given time. And so, people kind of come to their truths at different times, but I do think it has a ripple effect. Just like trauma has a ripple effect, I think healing has a ripple effect also.
Yeah, and if you think about of the millions of people before you, your ancestors, hundreds of thousands or millions or whatever, if any one of them made a different decision, if one got eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, one didn't meet or marry that person, or one died of starvation and didn't struggle through that winter, you would still exist in some form, but not in the form that you are now. And it's connecting to the reality of that is interesting. There's a lot of belief systems that are happening. People believe this, they believe in dragons, they believe in unicorns, and fundamentally, I understand my belief is that there's only one consciousness, and all the other beliefs are true and they're not true. They're just tools for us to put our intention into. And if you believe in a certain thing and that's useful in your development, in helping you to become more loving to yourself, use it. but I think it's the unconscious beliefs that we have that we're not unaware. And I think as we expand and develop and we look into our ancestors or whatever it is that we're looking into, finding these beliefs, you know, like you were saying, do you need to hold on to this locket? Is that a belief system? How much information is tied in with that? Unconsciously, there's a belief system thinking, well, I actually need to hold this because if I hold this, it means this, this, and this. And when you release that, the belief's going, oh, well, there's nothing left here. So you're disempowering or changing that belief system. So it's uncovering that. And when you can't, like we talk about forgiveness, like you forgive yourself when you're younger to go, oh, I wish I'd knew this now. And you can always feel guilty about something, but also forgiving your ancestors and some of the things that they did as well, not just thanking them, but we can't forgive it until we can access that information. Otherwise it's just intellect. It's not on an energetic level. So as we uncover, taking gratitude and forgiveness and whatever else we can apply to that level of learning is useful, because I think, like you say, you're clearing, you're healing. And if everything happens all at once, there is no time, then we're kind of, we're healing everything in the moment. And there's a lot of stuff we can't prove. A lot of this is conceptual. You can't say for definite that this happens and that happens. But what we can say is that we exist and that we know the difference between what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And if we can share that with other people and help them to, you know, through the fire, I think that's the journey. However, whatever form that takes. And it's unfortunately or fortunately, it's only when we experience the darkness that we can really appreciate the light.
I think so, and I think, you know, what you said about information, it's like we can know things logically, but then when we experience the truth and the change, and this is why I think it's a lifetime's work, because the more space we make, the deeper down the well we go, the more information comes to us, because we're clear. We're just like electromagnetic aerials and antennas, and we, you know, there's a 0-point field that's everywhere, and, you know, we can feel each other's hearts and energies, and, you know, the clearer that we get. And if I think about like my lineage and ancestry, you know, I've always known kind of facts and information, but when I've stepped into the energy work of that, it's completely different. And, you know, what I know now, my ancestors didn't know. If I think of, like, you know, my Irish nan, her mum, you know, she, there was a war going on, you know, her husband went off to war, she had children with an American soldier, the husband came back, oh no, what do you do? She gave her kids away, you know, to a neighbour. That was my nan. And then at 14, my nan was kicked out because men had worth and women didn't. So there's this 14-year-old Irish woman who's been brought up by not her family, and, you know, she was working on the potato fields, and she got pregnant and made a decision to lie about her age to get married. I mean, that decision in itself, had she not done that, she would have ended up in a nunnery and her child taken away, and then I wouldn't be here, you know. And then she had big Irish, you know, family, you know, 2 different men in husbands in her life that were abusive, you know, they made bad choices that had an impact. So on my mum, you know, I don't know my biological dad, but I know the man that brought me up, so there was a 2-father thing there. My children have different dads. So you see how all the way down the line, you know, that these things play out and actualize. And, you know, I love knowing this stuff, because I get to look back at the bigger picture, the eagle eye perspective, not the mouse perspective, where we're like, oh God, life is, you know, the eagle eye perspective, and go, wow, isn't it amazing how, you know, everything that overlaps. And when I said I feel more Irish as I get older, I remember in an ayahuasca ceremony in Peru, and you know, I was working with some ancestral stuff, and I was really, I was like transported to Ireland, and I had my hand, I was like a giant goddess deity, and I had my hands on the land, and I was purging, you know, there's a lot of heavy energy in Ireland, and I was purging, you know, and I was like, whew, you know, it felt, you know, quite heavy. And then I went to go visit a friend in Ireland, and about a week before I went to go visit, I kept seeing this ring as I was falling asleep. Is it called the Cladis ring, you know, with the heart? And I kept seeing it, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll buy myself one of them. Yeah, maybe I will. Anyway, you know, forget about things as you do. And then, you know, went to Ireland, and me and the kids and my friend and her children were in these waterfalls, and we're, you know, having a great time. And as we go and leave this place, it was like not another person around. As we go and leave this place, there's a Cladis ring just sat on this bench. And it felt to me, again, what we put meaning to, that this ring, it was only plastic, it wasn't like a gold, you know, ring or anything, but it was left there. It felt like the island was saying thank you. And they'd left this gift for me. You know, and it's things like that that we can decide whether that's true or not. But I suppose when you feel something, and then that's when you place the meaning on something, that's when we actualize what the truth is for ourselves.
I think when you become aware of these things, there's a synchronization that happens. There's breadcrumbs, as I call them, cosmic breadcrumbs. You go, yeah, okay, not going to give you the answers, but we're going to give you the hints to the answers. And the journey and it is actually, it's like we have guides, you know, we have spirit guides, people just manifest in your life for whatever reason. They're never there just to give you the answers, but they'll guide you in a certain way. And I think once you're open to that and you feel supported, it really helps the journey. Is there anything you'd kind of like to sort of end this podcast on, which I've found really fascinating and interesting? Is there any sort of words of wisdom for anyone that may be struggling with life at the moment?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? And I think I feel very fortunate to be able to see how we're also connected collectively. So I have so many people on this couch doing their inner work, and it's so interesting when, you know, when there's a full moon, or when there's a new moon, or when there's a solar flare, or when there's Mercury in retrograde, or something that's going on out there like microcosm, macrocosm, and I'll get a week worth of clients that come in and they're all angry. They're all really angry, and there's something that's going on up there, and then something clears, and then they come in and they're all in a different space, and I feel like I get a front row seat of how we're all connected. And so I suppose, you know, if someone's in the depths of their darkness in the cave, you know, to try and trust that that's where they need to be, but they're never alone. They're never alone. I find that people feel that they're very alone with everything, you know, and they're really not. They might feel that way, but we're all the same. We're all human beings that have come from the same places. As you said, our millions and billions of ancestors. It's like we're all here on this planet now. You are never alone. And whether people are scary and people aren't safe, then go and be in nature. Go and be around animals. Yeah, think about what you want to feed your brain. You know, we are hormones and we're chemicals, and we have the power and the choice to do something about that. You know, we can sit and be stagnant like a pond, you know, or we can choose to have movement and just see how that feels. You know, there's so many different tools, and as you said, the internet's there. There's so many different ways, and all roads, they all lead to this.
And reach out to someone, talk to someone, try something, do something a little bit out your comfort zone. And like you said, if you do the same things, you'll get the same results. And if you're not happy with the results, then do something else. But thank you for sharing this information, and I look forward to doing something like this again in the future. Thank you. Cheers.